Hey, what's up everyone? So this is going to be the 89th opening that I'd like to share with you, which is the Esaki Chimney opening. So this one is kind of like a side variation to the 88th opening, the Chimney opening. So the Chimney opening, while it's one of the official opening names and within most of the Othello Quest apps or Reversatile apps, basically Esaki is named after Mr. Esaki Yuta. I named it after him because he's one of the earliest players I've seen play this very, very effectively. Of course, other players do play it. So he's a Japanese player and he's 7 dan in the Japan from the Japan Othello Association, and he goes by the nickname Buta Buta Kobuta on Othello Quest. You might have seen him. So he's a very strong player for sure, and he can compete at the very highest levels, even against World Othello Champion levels. So I would say that he's definitely one of the players to look out for in the future if you see him at the World Othello Championship. So let's run through the sequence. It's essentially lead up to the typical chimney opening up to f4. And over here, it's just a continuation of the most common d7 approach by black. So over here, instead of playing the typical book opening sequence, which we covered in the 88th opening episode, so c4 over here would be the typical one, which is the book. So the variation that Mr. Esaki Yuta uses is c8 almost every time, and he used this very effectively. So it's very H play specific. So over here, just looking at the board, you might think that, hey, black might have an advantage because of that few discs that he has. But yeah, he does indeed have, but it's just a very small advantage. So usually this kind of variation surprises your opponent. I've tried it a bit myself. I did find that this opening is a bit effective as well. So typically, I think the natural response, even for somebody who doesn't have book knowledge, would be to either go to d3 or g5. So if you do know the book, maybe you go with g5. The typical variation that I see him doing is either to play g6 or he plays c7 essentially. So over here, one of the less intuitive moves for black would be to counter with f7. So this is fairly counterintuitive to flip two discs in two different directions because typically you want to kind of maintain a center shape. You might consider linking up your disc this way or the diagonal cuts on either d3 or f3. So all of them are actually flipping two discs in two different directions. So it makes it a bit harder to kind of discern between the moves unless you can think of the combo move. Basically, it's like a feed. You play f7, you feed e7, and then maybe you potentially jump into the center to c6, which might be favorable. So you just need to kind of convince yourself that's the flow that you want to take. So over here, obviously the response is not going to be e7, given that it gives an easy move for black to kind of regroup over here. So I think what is typically played is g6, which kind of still forces black to play an awkward move that flips two discs in two different directions, and at the same time, you give white a chance to form a for this hollow balance edge, if you will. So white can either play to f8, which forms a nice kind of four disc hollow balance edge over here for him, or alternatively, it would mean that white could probably play at c4 over here and just flip one disc in one direction to regroup. So yeah, basically this playout is counterintuitive for black, but it somehow seems to work for white. So that's very interesting from that perspective. So I would say that this opening, there's a lot of surprises. Black may be able to find h6, but the follow up to c4 is fairly simple for white. Black would then have to play out d8, give up e8 in order to get the access from d7 to access to g4 to kind of go out. And again, over here, white has a very nice follow-up just to sweep back the disc, form a solid for this edge, and it makes it pretty tricky for black to actually understand, which one may be the best move to kind of branch out. Although f3, it's still fairly possible to derive this move given that f3 points down to regroup at c6. But basically, white can jump to the edge, and black goes into the center. It's quite easy for white to actually try to control the center, given that white has a very strong for this balance edge to the bottom and also a very strong edge control over here. So one of the features about Mr. Esaki's gameplay is that the edge play is often played very, very well by himself. So I think this is something that is very interesting that I've seen him play. And his gameplay is very, very aggressive. So usually when he wins like by a huge margin. He chooses openings that they are really aggressive in his style. And if you get caught up in his style, you'll probably lose it from by a huge margin. So that's something very interesting about some of these very aggressive players. I think very similar to the world champion Mr. Okamoto. So I think him and Mr. Okamoto seems to have some similarities from that sense. So hopefully this opening helps you, introduces you to a bit of a variation of using the chimney opening as part of a side variation. If you're a diagonal player,